navigating the shifting sands of data protection and digital security globally, well, it can feel like a constant battle against the tide, can't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Just when you think you've got a handle on things, new regulations pop up, and the threats just seem to get more sophisticated.
Yeah, it's a landscape where staying informed isn't just, helpful, it's really essential.
Totally.
And in this deep dive, we're going to try and cut through some of that complexity for you. We'll be looking at the most significant recent developments in data protection laws across different regions,
Right.
and also tackling this increasingly critical issue of governments using powerful spyware.
Exactly. So we'll cover key changes in Europe, the fast evolving situation in the US, and those dynamic shifts happening over in Asia, the Middle East, and Africa.
Hmm.
And we really need to talk about how artificial intelligence is getting tangled up with data privacy considerations, too.
It's a huge intersection right now.
And of course, we can't ignore the serious risks posed by advanced spyware and the international efforts trying to address its spread. Now, this deep dive is brought to you by Stonefly. They're leaders in enterprise storage, backup and disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions.
Great folks over there.
Yeah, and if you're looking for secure, ransomware-proof storage, Stonefly offers air-gapped and immutable solutions. You can just reach them at sales@stonefly.com to schedule a demo.
Good to know. It's a lot to cover, definitely. But all these areas are interconnected. They have significant implications for how our data is protected and used.
Okay, so where should we start? Europe.
Let's start in Europe. Yeah,
Yeah.
the established data protection framework there, it continues to mature.
Okay, Europe. So we're not seeing massive overhauls, right?
Huh.
More like refinement of existing laws through guidance and how they're actually enforced.
That's a really good way to put it. GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, still the cornerstone. But, data protection authorities across the continent, they're constantly issuing interpretations, recommendations that shapes how it's applied day to day.
Right.
Now, in the UK, there has been talk of reform. We saw the proposed Data Use and Access Bill,
Oh,
the
yeah.
DUAB.
The DUAB. The name itself sounds like a push to, leverage data more. What was the main idea?
Well, the government positioned it as a way to unlock the economic potential of data, improve public services, that sort of thing.
Uh-huh.
But honestly, the general feeling is that the proposed changes were more incremental adjustments rather than some fundamental shift in the UK's data protection regime.
Okay.
And it's worth remembering this came after they scrapped the previous Data Protection and Digital Information Bill, the DPDI #2 bill, and of course the recent election adds a whole new layer to that political landscape now.
Right. Things could change again. So a steady evolution, not really a revolution in European data protection.
Me much.
Now, let's hop across the Atlantic. The United States. It feels like the pace there is much, much faster, especially at the state level.
You're absolutely right. The U.S. is seeing a real flurry of activity. We now have, 14 states with comprehensive data privacy laws actually in effect?
14. Wow.
And that number's set to grow. Another 6 states are scheduled to have their laws kick in during 2025 and early 2026.
That's a significant acceleration. But a patchwork of laws like that must create serious challenges for businesses operating nationwide, right?
Oh, definitely.
Do we have a sense of what's driving this state-level push? Is it just, a lack of federal action or...
I think it's probably a mix of things, yeah.
Yeah.
There's been that sense of stalled progress at the federal level on comprehensive privacy law, which maybe emboldened states to just take the lead, address their own constituents' concerns.
Makes sense.
Plus, different states just have their own unique economic priorities, social concerns, that shapes the focus of their specific laws.
Okay. And what about the federal government itself? Any shift in focus with the new administration? I heard talk about a renewed interest in regulating AI.
Yes, definitely seeing a pivot towards AI regulation federally. The stated aim is, balancing innovation with responsible development and use.
A classic balancing act.
Exactly. So this has involved the current administration revoking some previous executive orders on AI and introducing new directives to guide its use across different sectors.
Okay, so encouraging tech but managing the risks. What about specific areas like, say, protecting kids online? Any movement there?
Protecting children online is, yeah, definitely a priority. There's strong bipartisan interest in Congress to strengthen safeguards for young people on social media.
Good.
And the leadership of the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, seems to share that focus. Though, interestingly, they have indicated they might re-examine the recent amendments to the COPPA rule, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act.
Huh, revisit recent changes. That is interesting. And what about health data? Always a sensitive topic. Any developments?
Health data is still critical, absolutely. We're seeing a growing trend of states kind of following Washington State's lead, either strengthening their existing health data privacy laws or enacting entirely new ones.
Right.
It just reflects how incredibly sensitive that information is and the potential for real harm if it's mishandled.
No question. Now, international data transfers from the U.S., I understand there have been some important developments, especially regarding transfers to certain countries.
Yes, Executive Order 14117. That, along with the Department of Justice's final rule, is a big step.
Okay.
This order is basically designed to prevent access by what they call countries of concern, specifically naming China, Iran, and Russia, to bulk sensitive personal data of Americans and also certain U.S. government-related data.
Wow.
This will definitely have a major impact on companies transferring data to those places.
Sounds like a really significant move to wall off sensitive info. And for companies that also operate in Europe, maybe relying on the UK-Swiss U.S. data privacy framework, what should they be watching in the U.S.?
Good question. For those organizations, the current administration's approach towards the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, or PCLOB, is key.
The PCLOB, right?
That board plays a crucial role in the data privacy framework. So any changes to how it operates or its priorities could affect the legality of those transatlantic data flows. Keep an eye on that.
Okay, lots happening on both sides of the Atlantic, clearly interconnected. Let's shift focus now. Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. You mentioned the data protection landscape there might be undergoing even more fundamental changes.
That's right, yeah. Perhaps even more rapid transformations in some cases. We're seeing huge legislative activity across these regions. New data protection laws in India, Indonesia, Australia, Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
And ongoing developments, new regulations evolving in places like China and Vietnam, too.
It's a real whirlwind of new laws. What's driving this widespread adoption over there?
Several things, I think. You've got increased internet use, more digital services, so greater awareness of privacy issues among people. Governments are also seeing the need to build their own data governance frameworks, partly to build trust in the digital economy, maybe also assert more control over data flows.
Right.
And what's really interesting is that many of these new laws are regulating broader categories of data, going beyond just traditional personal data.
So not just names and addresses anymore. What kind of broader data are we talking about?
Things like device data, your online behavior, even aggregated data sets in some places. This makes compliance way more complex for multinational businesses.
Yeah.
They need to understand these wider definitions of what's protected.
That certainly raises the bar for global companies. Okay, let's zoom out a bit. Let's look at some overarching trends in data governance that kind of tie all these regional developments together.
Yeah, this is where you start to see the bigger picture. The push to unlock the economic value of data.
Right.
The increasing need to regulate AI, efforts to create fairer digital markets, and the absolute necessity of safeguarding critical infrastructure. They're all converging and really impacting data protection and privacy.
It's like all these different regulatory areas are starting to overlap and influence each other. You mentioned the EU's new digital decade laws. How do those fit in?
Well, the EU has rolled out this comprehensive package of laws as part of its digital strategy. And these have really far-reaching effects for anyone operating in the EU.
Okay.
These laws cover everything from digital services and markets to data governance, cybersecurity, all have direct or indirect impacts on how data is handled and protected.
And with AI advancing so quickly, being adopted everywhere, I imagine data protection authorities must be watching very, very closely how it's being used.
Oh, absolutely. Regulators are actively scrutinizing AI development and deployment to make sure they comply with existing privacy laws.
Makes sense.
I mean, given that AI models train on and use massive amounts of data, businesses have to integrate data protection principles right into the design of their AI systems.
So privacy by design for AI.
Exactly. It can't be an afterthought. It has to be fundamental from the start.
Sounds like privacy pros have a big role to play in this AI evolution. And you mentioned an emerging debate around AI governance. How do the established principles of data protection law feed into that discussion?
What's really insightful, I think, is that the core principles we already have in data protection law, things like purpose limitation, data minimization, transparency, accountability,
Yeah.
they provide a really valuable starting point for thinking about ethical, responsible AI use. Because AI fundamentally relies on collecting and processing data.
Right. It's all about the data.
So as AI keeps evolving, we can definitely expect more regulatory focus right at that intersection of privacy and AI.
So the foundations of privacy law are kind of becoming the building blocks for broader AI governance. Okay. Now, you wanted to dive deeper into a specific region to illustrate some of these trends. Indonesia, what's the story there?
Yes, Indonesia. They recently took a really significant step with their new personal data protection law, the PDP law. Before this, Indonesia didn't have a single comprehensive privacy law. They relied on a mix of sector-specific rules, like the Electronic Information and Transactions Law, EIT law, and various government regulations.
So the PDP law is a major move towards a unified approach in Indonesia.
Exactly. It creates a formal legal structure for protecting personal data nationwide. And it defines processing of personal data very broadly, basically covering everything from collection and storage to analysis, transfer, and deletion.
That sounds really comprehensive, the whole data life cycle.
It is, and importantly, the PDP law mandates that organizations controlling personal data must keep a record of all their processing activities, a ROPA.
A ROPA, like in GDPR?
Similar idea, yeah.
Huh?
Helps ensure accountability, transparency, and how data is handled.
And the legal basis for processing data, does the Indonesian law align with, say, GDPR on that?
Yes, it does. The PDP law lists several lawful bases for processing, very similar to GDPR. Consent is a key one, needing explicit agreement for specific purposes.
Okay. And the fundamental principles: limited collection, purpose limitation, accuracy, security.
All there. The PDP law really reinforces those core data protection principles. Collect only what's needed, use it only for stated purposes, ensure data subject rights, maintain accuracy, security, transparency. It also emphasizes responsible, demonstrable processing.
Sounds like a solid foundation. Are there any exceptions, situations where these rules might be relaxed?
Yes, there are partial exemptions. These mainly apply when processing is necessary for things like national defense, law enforcement, public interest in state administration, financial sector supervision, or statistical scientific research.
Uh-huh.
But crucially, these activities must still be conducted within the bounds of other applicable laws.
That makes sense. Balancing public interest. What about transferring data outside Indonesia? Are there specific rules?
Yes, cross-border transfers are allowed under the PDP law, but with conditions. The transferring organization has to ensure the recipient country provides an adequate level of protection.
Adequacy, okay.
If the recipient country doesn't meet that standard, then the organization needs to put appropriate safeguards in place. Failing that, they need explicit consent from the individual.
Right.
We expect future government regulations will give more specifics on how adequacy will be assessed, maybe even a list of approved countries.
So a risk-based approach aiming for consistent protection. The law also establishes a data protection officer role, a DPO. Is that mandatory for everyone in Indonesia?
Interestingly, no, not a blanket requirement like in some laws.
Hmm.
The PDP law formally establishes the DPO role, which wasn't explicit before.
Yeah.
But mandatory DPO appointment is required mainly for public service entities, or if your core activities involve large-scale, systematic monitoring or large-scale processing of sensitive data or criminal data.
Ah, so targeted.
Exactly. We expect more details on the specific criteria in implementing regulations later.
Got it. And data security, a cornerstone of any privacy law. What does the PDP law say?
It includes a general obligation for data controllers to implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure security. It's principle-based, considering the nature of the data and the risks.
Okay.
While we're waiting for more detailed regulations, existing best practices and principles from earlier regulations offer guidance, things like confidentiality, integrity, availability.
Standard security principles. Now, breaches happen. What about breach notification requirements under the PDP law?
Right. If a breach occurs, they call it a personal data protection failure, the data controller must notify affected individuals and the new data protection agency, currently COMDIGI, within 72 hours.
72 hours. Okay, that's quite strict.
Yes. And for more significant breaches impacting public services or the public interest, there's also a requirement for broader public notification. The notice needs details about the breach, when, how, and the mitigation steps being taken.
Underscores the need for quick action. What about penalties for noncompliance? What consequences could organizations face?
The PDP law has a range of administrative sanctions. Written warnings, temporary suspension of business, administrative fines potentially up to 2% of annual income or revenue,
Wow, 2% could be huge.
and even restrictions on system access. Again, more specifics on how these apply are expected in future regulations.
Are there criminal penalties, too, for more serious stuff?
Yes, the law includes criminal sanctions for things like unlawfully obtaining or collecting data, unlawfully disclosing or using it, or creating fake personal data for gain.
Okay.
These carry potential imprisonment and significant fines, with even higher fines for corporations. Courts can also impose extra penalties, like seizing illicit profits.
So serious teeth.
Definitely. And remember, enforcement isn't just the Data Protection Agency. Sectoral regulators like the Financial Services Authority for banks can act, and law enforcement can pursue criminal prosecution.
A multi-layered approach. Lastly, on Indonesia, what about individual rights? What can people do regarding their data?
The PDP law gives individuals rights like access, rectification, erasure, restricting processing, objecting to processing, and data portability in some cases.
Standard rights, mostly.
Yes. And importantly, individuals can lodge complaints with the Data Protection Agency about processing or automated decisions that significantly affect them. While the complaint mechanisms are still being set up, people can already seek civil remedies under existing law for damages from breaches.
Okay, so Indonesia has clearly made big strides with the PDP law. Now let's pivot to something quite concerning. The increasing use of spyware by governments. This sounds like fiction, but it's very real.
Is deeply troubling, yeah. We've seen more and more evidence of governments using military-grade spyware against their own citizens. The Pegasus project really brought this into the spotlight, focusing on the NSO Group software.
And Pegasus is incredibly invasive, right? It can basically hijack someone's phone remotely.
Absolutely. It can infiltrate smartphones, track all communications, access stored data, and tragically, there are documented cases linking its use to serious harm for the targets.
Horrifying.
What's really alarming is how widespread this tech has become. Estimates suggest at least 65 governments worldwide have acquired commercial spyware.
65.
And often, the companies selling these tools are based in democratic countries.
That's a shocking statistic. Do we have specific examples of countries and the spyware they've reportedly used?
We do. Reports like the Pegasus project identified countries like Hungary, India, Mexico, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, all allegedly using NSO Group's Pegasus.
And often against.
Often targeting journalists, human rights activists, political opponents. It really shows the potential for misuse.
It really does. And it seems democracies that haven't tackled this are facing some blowback now.
That's a critical point.
Yeah.
By not taking spyware proliferation seriously, maybe even facilitating exports, democracies risk undermining human rights globally.
Right.
Some might argue for a foreign policy that doesn't sharply divide democracies and autocracies, but projects like Pegasus show the real dangers of that. Ignoring spyware's impact can embolden authoritarianism and damage the credibility of democracies as human rights defenders.
So, failing to uphold democratic values here has real negative consequences. What can actually be done about this problem?
Well, experts in this field suggest a crucial first step. Democratic nations should put a moratorium on the sale or transfer of private surveillance tech.
A moratorium. Stop sales completely.
Temporarily, yes. Until clear, accountable rules for its use and export are established and agreed upon. Given the huge potential for abuse, continuing sales without strong safeguards is just ethically hard to justify.
A strong step, but maybe necessary. What about longer-term solutions?
Longer term, we need a binding, effectively enforced export control regime, something to curb the spread of these dangerous tools to actors likely to misuse them.
Like the Wassenaar arrangement.
Wassenaar arrangement could be a foundation, yeah.
Yeah.
But it needs strengthening. It's currently non-binding and needs better enforcement. For countries with a clear pattern of abuse, maybe permanent restrictions on sales are needed. We've even seen some companies act like Celebrate, reportedly blocking Serbia from using its tech due to misuse concerns. That shows maybe some growing industry responsibility.
That's encouraging. Are there legal avenues being pursued against the spyware companies themselves?
Yes, some significant legal developments. WhatsApp, for instance, won a notable legal victory against NSO Group in a U.S. court over Pegasus use.
Ah, I remember that.
WhatsApp called it a major win for privacy, stressing accountability for these firms. The lawsuit alleged NSO targeted about 1,400 WhatsApp users back in 2019.
A big precedent. And did the trial reveal more about Pegasus's capabilities?
It did. Meta disclosed during the case that Pegasus goes way beyond WhatsApp. It can secretly compromise phones, get access to data, mics, cameras, using various exploits in messaging apps, browsers, operating systems on both iOS and Android.
Wow.
And NSO Group apparently invests tens of millions each year developing and maintaining these tools.
That's disturbing. The sophistication, the resources, and this feels like just one part of a much wider, constantly evolving digital threat landscape.
Absolutely. The constant stream of news about malware, new vulnerabilities, it's a nonstop reminder. We see exploits in SonicWall appliances, Asus routers, new sophisticated malware like Supercard X, Stillacarat.
It never ends.
It highlights the continuous need for vigilance, for robust security.
It's a seemingly endless cycle of threats and defenses. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, it's crystal clear the global landscape of data protection and digital security is incredibly dynamic. Lots of opportunities, but also huge challenges.
That's the key takeaway, I think. Whether you're an individual worried about your data or an organization operating globally, you have to stay vigilant, adapt constantly.
Yeah.
These legal and tech terrains are just so complex.
Right, so here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. In a world where technology just keeps accelerating, how can individuals and how can democratic nations effectively strike that sustainable balance, that balance between fostering innovation and safeguarding our fundamental rights to privacy and security, especially in an increasingly surveilled world?
That's the million-dollar question.
It really is. It's something that's going to keep demanding our attention. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us into this really vital topic.
Thank you. And a final reminder, this deep dive was sponsored by Stonefly. They're leaders in enterprise storage, backup and disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions. If you need secure, ransomware-proof, air-gapped, and immutable storage, reach out to them. Sales@stonefly.com to schedule a demo.